Hi Year 11, today I'm just going to spend a little bit of time talking you through some useful tips and tricks for your GCSE chemistry exam. The time you have for this paper is 1 hour and 45 minutes. It's half an hour longer than the combined students have. This is due to the extra content you've covered and will be assessed on. Essential equipment for your exam include a pen, pencil, ruler, rubber and calculator. A pencil and ruler are especially important for those graph skill questions where you'll be asked to plot some data on a graph and also draw a line of best fit. And a scientific calculator is really important because, as you know, chemistry is full of calculations and equations, and you need to be able to have a calculator to hand to help you with those. Please don't try and do a long multiplication or division on your paper and work it out when you can just put it into a calculator. Okay, now I'm going to just move on to what is actually assessed in your paper. So here's a breakdown of C1 to C5, and you'll be assessed on all of these topics. I'm not going to go through the list one by one, as you have the exact same list in your revision guides. However, what I would like you to turn your attention to is the sections that I've highlighted in purple for some of the topics. So for bonding, for quantitative chemistry, for chemical changes, and for energy changes. This is all additional triple content. So please, when you are revising, make sure you do not miss this content out. And you make sure that it is included in your revision notes. It's content that the combined scientists do not cover, but you guys do, and therefore there's a high chance of it coming up on your paper. Okay, so moving on to general revision techniques then. Firstly, make sure that you have your GCSE chemistry revision guide to hand. Pick a topic that you want to revise. For example, it might be chemical bonding, and then within chemical bonding, it might be the ionic bonding section. And then take a piece of A4 paper and fold this in half, lengthways if you can. From the revision guide, take notes and generate questions and answers for the topic and the lesson you have chosen to cover on one side. On the other side, write your answers, and once you have gone through these, ask somebody to test you and highlight the questions you got wrong. This will then help you to identify any of your gaps and allow you to readdress these. So anything that you got wrong, you can then go over, have a practice at those questions again. I do strongly recommend as well that when you revise, you switch up the topics from day to day. So don't spend a solid 3 days revising one topic and then moving to the next. Interleave the topics that you are revising, which just means exchange between them. And what that will do is it'll help your long-term memory to retain information better, okay, and bring it into your working memory. So if you revise bonding one day, revise a different topic the next day, and revisit bonding at a later date and test yourself on that. Lastly, practicing exam questions. Okay, this is a fab technique, and you've all got exam homework papers, so make sure you're completing these papers and trying to complete them in a timely manner. So following the time guidelines, for example, 1 hour and 45 minutes. Revision guides. Okay, so these are the revision guides. If you have any one of these, that's absolutely fine. You don't need to have all three, okay, because essentially it covers the same content, they're just laid out slightly different. So 1 out of the 3 will do. Now, when you are going to come across your exam questions, please make sure that you're reading the question. Make sure you're looking at the number of available marks and you make the relevant number of points. So as you can see from the example on the left, the question is 3 marks. And it says explain why diamond has a high melting point. So you need to make 3 different points as to why diamond has a high melting point. And that should get you all the marks. Both examples here are 3 marks, but they're completely different style of question. One is a long answer question and the other one is a calculation. The calculation question has given you some numbers, so you know that you will have to use them at some point. Okay, and those numbers there are relative atomic masses. Try and recall the formula you need for calculations and make sure that you show you're working out. Don't just write the answer you've got on your calculator straight in without any working out shown, because you do get awarded marks for working out even if your answer is wrong at the end. Periodic table then. The periodic table. All right, you're going to get given this in your exam, so there's no need to memorize it. Don't waste your time trying to memorize where all the elements are. However, there's some key rules that are worth remembering. Okay, the numbers at the top of the column are known as group numbers. So I've just highlighted those. And group numbers, they tell you the amount of outer electrons an element in that group will have. So for example, boron, which is in group 3, will have 3 electrons in its outer shell. Lithium in group 1 will have 1 electron in its outer shell, and so on. So if you can identify where an element is within the periodic table and what group it's in, that's a general rule that's usually useful to remember. And another key tip, just remember that metals are always found on the left-hand side, so group 1 to group 3, and non-metals are always found on the right-hand side. Okay, I did mention graphs earlier, so just a couple of tips on when you get a graph question, which are usually between 4 and 6 marks, depending on what they ask you to do. Make sure you take the time to read all the instructions. Read the question blurb, the information they give at the beginning to label your graphs. Make sure you read all of the instructions in terms of do what the examiner has asked you. If they've asked you to put a label on one of the axes, make sure you put that label on the correct axes. Use a ruler for plotting and also for your line of best fit, and make sure all the points are as close to the line of best fit as possible, because that's the whole point of a line of best fit. It shows you the general trend. So if you remember these top tips and tricks when doing graph questions, guys, you are more than likely to get 4 to 5 marks out of 5 marks. Okay. Moving on to the required practical questions. These are usually 6-marker questions. So if you break it down step by step, the first thing you should do is highlight the important information from the question. So what key scientific words are being used in the question? Identify what we call the independent variables. So what are we changing? What have they said we are investigating? Then identify and state the dependent variable. So what are we measuring? How would we measure this dependent variable? So what specialist equipment would we use, and how often would we take those measurements? So would it be every minute, every 30 seconds, so on? Identify a minimum of 3 control variables. So which variables would we need to keep the same to make sure there are no effects on our results? If you can identify variables and make sure that you identify them correctly, you're going to hit that 5 to 6 mark bracket. So try and include as much of the variables you can in your answer. Another thing that we've noticed for chemistry exams in particular is the bonding topic and the bonding questions that come up. Now they can hold a lot of the marks, and if you know how to approach these and how to answer these, you can pick up a lot of the marks, which will sometimes make the difference of a grade. So bonding questions, they often ask you to link the bonding and structure of the molecule to the properties the molecule has. So some of the properties they'll ask you to explain may be high melting or boiling points, low melting or boiling points, and the ability for a molecule or a substance to conduct electricity. So one top tip to remember when approaching these questions, if you can't remember what type of bonding is present, it's a good thing to remember that if the structure is a solid at room temperature, which they'll tell you in the question, it'll have a high melting or boiling point. If the structure is a liquid or a gas, again, we get that from the question, it will have a low melting or boiling point. And ionic structures will only conduct electricity when they have been dissolved or when they are molten. If you can remember those tips and those tricks, then attacking those kind of questions will become a lot easier for you, okay? And then lastly, I just want to end with this, the key equations and formulae to remember the calculations. A lot of it comes from the quantitative chemistry topic, of course. That's all about numbers. It's all about amounts in chemistry. So these, you would do really, really well to practice these formulae, to practice these equations and remember these. You also need to be able to rearrange them. Another key tip or trick is an examiner will award 3 to 4 marks for a calculation that involves you rearranging the equation. So if you see a calculation question and it's about 4 marks worth, make sure that you know exactly what the examiner is asking you to work out. Rearrange the equation if you have to. Do any conversions that you need to do. And make sure you give your answer to the right significant figures if it tells you to do that in the question. Usually when it's a 4-mark calculation, the 4th mark comes from having your answer in the correct significant figures, which is usually 2 or 3 significant figures. So all of this, I hope all of these tips and tricks will help with your revision, okay, and you've found out some of the key bits to look out for when practicing some exam questions yourself. Again, if you have any questions on these, or if you want to readdress any of this, just speak to your chemistry teacher or come and see myself, and we'd be happy to help. Good luck with your centre assessed papers, guys. Thank you.